Hello and welcome to Focus on Liberia. My name is Dennis Jai and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. The month of February is Black History Month and Liberian history is Black history. So for the entire month of February, we're going to be bringing you Liberian history from a series of Liberian professionals, experts, historians, and what have you. In today's edition, we're going to be talking about the history of presidential elections and referendums in Liberia from 1847 to today. My guest is Mr. Josiah F. Joekai. Mr. Joekai, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you very much, Ja. It's an opportunity to always be here on Focus on Liberia to share and contribute to the conversations. I want to thank you for the creativity and innovation. This is my first time being interviewed from this studio you're sitting in. So, when I got on, I was like, wow, I haven't, been interviewed from this other studio before. So this is the result of hard work and I see the productivity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We try and we're improving every day and we're happy that you're here. Today is also Super Bowl Sunday in America. They play football, and so we started a little bit early to give people a chance to watch Super Bowl. But we want to watch the Super Bowl as well, but there's nothing that can replace what we do here at Focus on Liberia. We're going to be talking about Liberian history, because how well can we prepare for the present? How well can we tackle the issues of the future if we don't know our history? So the entire month of February, we have devoted that to Liberian history in commemoration of Black History Month. We're going to be discussing topics like, especially around the presidents. So we're going to be discussing topics like the whole idea of this dominant presidency or the hegemonic presidency that will be done by Dr. George Clay here next Sunday. And from there, we're going to go to the presidential term, what they did, their vision. We're going to start with the Barclay plan. President Barclay, and then we're going to go into the vision of the rest of the presidents up to today. And we really promise that it's going to be exciting. It's going to be a good one for our listening audience. Today, the history of presidential elections and referendums from 1847 till now. And Mr. Josiah F. Joekai is going to be the one who is talking about this. By way of introduction, Mr. Joekai is an election practitioner with more than 5 years of elections management in Liberia and the West African region. He's a member of the Global Electoral Network and co-presented on election management in post-conflict countries in West Africa at the Global Electoral Forum in Brussels, Belgium in 2011. He's also a Bridge trained and a Bridge certificated facilitator. Bridge is the building resource in democracy and elections. Bridge is the highest specialized election certification authority. We should also note that Mr. Joekai unsuccessfully contested the elections in Liberia for the House of Representatives. So he's loaded. Mr. Joekai, again, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you. It's always my pleasure.
All right. Talking about presidential elections, and we're going to hit on some legislative elections as well. But we want to look at the history of election. We want to welcome all our viewers from across the globe. Please do us the usual favor by sharing the show. Invite your children to listen to this and see this whole idea of election, how it started, how it has been, some analysis, and we're going to go through it all. But before we start about election, let's talk about democracy, because election is just one tenet of democracy. So we have had elections since 1847. So let's talk about when we say that's the beginning of the Liberian democracy.
Okay, so I like the way you talk about starting with democracy itself, because it's quite important for people to understand the significance of the concept itself. So democracy can be, traced to ancient Greek, and it's just to do a little bit of academics here. It's a word derived from two Greek words. Demos, meaning the people, and krasia, meaning power or authority. So krasia stands for crassy in English. And so the word democracy, in essence, is the people's power is people's power. So if you take some dictionary definitions of democracy, they all will be centered around people having the authority to govern themselves. So some dictionaries will tell you democracy is a form of government that gives power to the people. It will also tell you that it is government by the people, for the people, and with the people. So that is democracy in itself. But democracy has two basic forms. You have direct democracy, and which you refer to also as pure democracy, and you have indirect democracy, which is referred to as representative democracy. Now, representative democracy has different types. So there you have electoral democracy, you have liberal democracy, you have parliamentary democracy like the one practiced by the British, and then you have presidential democracy. So in essence, they are not really different. They all fall under what you call indirect or representative democracy. So you also have direct democracy, which is pure democracy. It's a democracy in the form of referendum initiatives. So in direct democracy, you have what you call semi-referendum. You have popular or citizen-centered referendum, because they use referendum as a means of the people exercising their authority directly.
Right.
They don't have to wait for their legislature or their parliament to adopt a resolution before they can make change to their constitution or to their laws that govern them. So the proposition goes to them directly into an election, and they vote on it and approve the proposition or reject the proposition, and the legislatures have nothing to do in that regard. They don't change the decision of the people. And so that's the direct form of democracy. So in essence, whether direct or indirect, election is at the heart of democracy. So they are complementary. You cannot take them apart. You can take one from the other because it's like a car and the engine. That's how democracy and election works. So when you have a vehicle without an engine, I'm not sure you will still refer to that as a vehicle, because it's not going to work. So it has to have an engine. So election is
so Mr. Joekai, can we have democracy without election?
I don't see that happening, because democracy is in essence practiced by upholding the rule of law. And it says that if a government should be instituted, that's democracy, instituted, it should be instituted by the people, for the people, and it has to be through a form of election. And that election has to be conducted within the confines or perimeters of a legal framework to ensure the rule of law. So whether you talk about direct democracy or indirect democracy, democracy have the people at the center stage. So it's all about the people, no matter how they exercise their franchise, whether in the representative democracy, where they have to act through their representatives, or through direct democracy, where they themselves have to take the action and make the decision. So it's going to be about the people, no matter what you do. So in essence, that is what democracy is.
So now, does democracy have some standard that we need to meet to call it democracy, or it's just? So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, there are benchmarks. In a functional democracy, you need a legal framework. That's the first principle that must be instituted, that must exist. A legal framework that will clearly delineate or define the roles of all the actors.
Right.
The government, the electoral management body, the voters themselves, in terms of eligibility, who amongst the citizens will have the right to vote, the way the elections is conducted, the entire election operations, it has to be consistent with the legal framework of the given country. That's why the constitution or the law of the country must guarantee the principles of democracy to have a functioning democracy. So in Liberia, for example, I'll give you a classic example. In Liberia, for example, if you must have a free, fair, and transparent election as a way of strengthening our democracy, you must ensure that that election is conducted within the parameters of the legal framework. And the legal framework will include the Constitution, the aspects on election, the elections law of Liberia, and it has been amended like 3 times. The new elections law amended in 2003, amended in 2004, and amended in 2014. They all form part of the legal framework. And then all the codes of conduct that will be promulgated by the electoral management body. In the case of Liberia, the National Elections Commission. The regulations and guidelines governing that election will all constitute what you call the legal framework. That is a benchmark that is non-negotiable. Then the election must be held on a international accepted benchmarks. It must meet those standards, and those standards are clearly defined. So those are the principles that must be met to ensure that your democracy is functional and is guaranteed.
Thank you. Now let's go into the election itself. So Liberia, and let's relate that to Liberia. What also are the benchmarks for us to say, well, even though you have a democracy, you're having this election, but it is not free and fair, so we disqualify you from having. Do we reach that point to say, well, even though you have a democracy, but because your election is it has issues, what should that litmus test be? What should that benchmark be for us to certify a particular election as meeting the gold standard or meeting certain standard or not? So that before we can actually say, oh yes, at least there's some form of democracy.
Right. So for every election to be deemed credible or transparent, there are 2 things that have to happen. The first thing, the given election must be conducted within your own established legal framework. Don't violate any. So don't violate the aspects, the provisions of the Constitution on elections management. Make sure that you stay within the confines of those provisions. Don't violate your own elections laws.
Right.
Don't violate your own published or promulgated regulations and guidelines. Don't violate your own codes of conduct. They are banning on the Electoral Commission, on the voters, on the government, and all the stakeholders like civil society organizations and everybody. Even international bodies that come in to monitor, and observe elections. They have their own regulation and guidelines. And when they come with a checklist. I went on many of those missions to different countries. And you have the checklist that you need to make sure you check or you cross to ensure that the election was deemed credible or non-credible. So if we say that we are not using military vehicles or public vehicles to transport electoral materials, and the Elections Commission goes ahead and take 5 AFL trucks and put electoral materials in it to deliver at certain polling centers, that's a violation because your own regulation says that you must not do that.
You must not do that.
That's
good. And that's why I'm happy you are here to talk about this. So now that set the stage for us to talk about the history of elections from 1847 to now. Let's get this going, and we have divided this whole thing into 2. During the First Republic, we start from 1847 to 1980, and also the Second Republic, which is from 1980 till now. So let's get this started. And I even believe that, and because we're going to talk on referendum as well, I believe there was one that started even before 1847. But let's go into the history of elections, starting with 1847, and we can throw in referendum as well as we move through.
Certainly, I agree. But I beg your pardon. We cannot talk about 1847 without talking about 1846, because 1846 gave rise to 1847.
I agree.
So in 1846, there was a referendum conducted for the Declaration of Independence. And usually when people are counting the number of referenda that we have had in Liberia, they don't usually include 1846. They take it strictly from 1847 when we adopted a new constitution. So I like to make that reference that 1846 is significant because the action of those who declare our independence, the forefathers, was also legal. They sought the approval of the people before they could proceed with the announcement of our independence from the American Colonization Society. So they conducted a referendum that was approved and that gave them the go-ahead to declare our independence. So 1846 is significant in that respect. So that was the beginning of us practicing this concept we call democracy. And mind you, it was in line with democratic practices in the United States. And there are obvious reasons for that. So we're not going to go into that. So 1847, like you said, Dennis, after we declare independence, we had a referendum to declare our independence in 1847. We also had the first presidential election in 1847. I think it was in September. And that election was held alongside a referendum. The significance of the referendum is that we were able to adopt a new constitution, a brand new constitution, that had an executive, a presidency with executive powers, and also had a bicameral legislature. That is very significant, Dennis.
Yeah.
That was the beginning of the organization of our government in the form of what we're now talking about, democracy. And alongside with that referendum, like I said from the outset, was the election of the vice president, then governor, Joseph Jenkins Roberts. And it will interest you to know that after 1846, there were two political ideologies that really evolved. And along the lines which the election of 1847 was held, you had Joseph Jenkins Roberts, who was governor, and so he had a party known as the pro-administration party.
Yeah.
And then you had Samuel Benedict, his opponent,
the anti-administration.
Yeah, on the other side, who had the anti-administration party. So those were the two political parties, but actually it did not exist in isolation or just because they wanted to give names to their vehicles that were taking them to the presidential election. But they really evolved from the American system, the conservative right and the center-left Democratic Party. And so because you had a pro-administration party, it was basically center-left. And then you had the anti that was basically center-right. So the two of them went into the election, and Samuel Benedict was defeated by Joseph Jenkins Roberts, and Roberts became the first president of Liberia. Then on, Dennis, up to 2017, we've had 51 presidential elections. We have had 25 presidents coming out of those presidential elections. And then you had the first republic producing about 21 of those elections. And then the second republic producing, 21 of those presidents. And then the second republic producing 4 of those presidents, a total of 25 of those presidents.
Wow. It's funny that in 1847, we have pro-administration party and anti-administration party. Today, even though we have a lot of political parties, but what do we hear? Pro-government, opposition.
Opposition, and we just cluster the opposition into one. But those ideologies, Dennis, developed into something very significant in our history. the Republican Party and the True Whig Party that was known as the Liberian Whig Party, that was very significant. Those two ideologies remain very consistent. And that is why when people say that we have an emerging democracy, nascent or bourgeoisie democracy, a young democracy, it's not right. I'm also guilty, of that. Many folks, even many scholars, some of them in speaking, sometimes they just say our democracy is young, is emerging. I can understand why they say young, emerging. Probably they may be looking at the quality of our democracy. But historically, we don't have a young or emerging democracy. We have a very old democracy that is dated as far back as 1846. I'm not even talking about 1847. Up to now, we should be talking about some 174 years. 2021, we're making 174 years of
I think you preempted my question, because we have had 19 referendums, as you said, 51 presidential elections, and 55 legislative elections.
Yeah.
How dare you tell me liberal democracy is young?
Okay, so and I'm sure many of us have been tempted over and over. Every time we say, we need to strengthen, we need to improve our young democracy, I think we are tempted to say that always because of the quality, of our democracy. We're not saying that Liberia is not doing well when it comes to democratization or democratic practices. I can tell you, with somebody experienced in doing elections in some of the countries in West Africa, Liberia is one of the best. Liberia is considered semi-democratic. That is, Liberia is really set up to meet the actual democratic goals, established internationally and by her own standards, by her own laws. Liberia is doing well. I was opportune. I can tell you, I was opportune in 2012 to do a presentation to all the political parties in Sierra Leone and the full electoral commissions of the Mana River Union. It was organized by the United Nations office in Sierra Leone and the United Nations office for West Africa. And in that presentation, when I researched to do the presentation, what I realized was that for example, I'll give you some example, Guinea, and they were very uncomfortable when I made the presentation and said that in the presence of the electoral chairs of those countries. Guinea, for example, is heavily politically committed because you have a number of government institutions that carry out election functions, election activities, like the Ministry of Internal Affairs, almost like working directly with the Electoral Commission to deliver elections. And I said to them that was wrong. They need a comprehensive reform so that they can do a lot to make their Electoral Commission independent. And then you will increase the faith of the citizens in the electoral process. That is very significant in the citizens believing in their own electoral system. So like for Cote d'Ivoire, for example, the issue that caused the problem after the election and you had death, you had violence, was because you have an electoral management body that does not have the authority to announce election results. It conducts the election, but the election result has to go through the Constitutional Court. So and in elections, you cannot have two bodies having those equal responsibilities, especially the announcement of the elections result is very critical. It's very, very critical. In Sierra Leone, the issue they had was their absolute majority system. It was not like Liberia. Liberia's absolute majority system calls for 50% of the vote plus one. A candidate must win on the first ballot. But in Sierra Leone, you have 55%. So at that time, the chair of the Sierra Leone Commission was Dr. Top. She was there, and I said the only thing Sierra Leone needs to do is to do a reform to be able to join many of the countries that have the 50% plus one vote absolute majority system. So Liberia is doing well. Not that we are too bad off, and especially out of post-conflict situation. That was one of the reasons why Liberia was selected to do a co-presentation with Ghana in 2011 in Brussels, and I was the one selected to do that. Coming out of post-conflict situation, the one of the experience of post-conflict elections in West Africa, and we co-presented so very well. The organizers, UNDP, the UNDP, the commission, the electoral management body, management system, they were all happy about what we presented about them. And the reason why they told Ghana is because Ghana is actually doing well.
We're doing well, yeah.
Yeah, in terms of the sustenance of his democracy, even though they almost crashed out in 2012, but they are doing extremely well with that. So Liberia also came very strong, talking about all the gains she made following the civil crisis, and was able to manage its own election, to some extent, with Liberians managing the process. So Liberia has been doing well. Our democracy is not young, even though we need to do more. But
of
it's
course,
we have a democracy.
So that was the first election, 1847. President Governor Joseph Jenkins Robert won over Samuel Benedict, and this was for 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years.
Let's go into the other elections. And if there was any referendum.
Many elections, the Republican Party produced people like Daniel Basha Warner. And let me tell you something. It was that our small talk we're having, you and I, about pro and anti-administration parties. The Republican Party and the True Wheat Party evolved along those same lines. So the Republican Party, on whose ticket Joseph Jenkins Roberts won, ruled, up to 1878. They ruled up to 1878, and they produced people like Daniel Basha Warner, like James Briggs Spain, until James Briggs Spain was defeated. And 1878, it was Anthony W. Gardner. When he was elected on the True Wheat Party ticket, that was the beginning of the rule of the True Wheat Party. From 1878 all the way to 1980, that's about 102 years of rule. And then plus the 31 years of rule of the Republican Party made it 133 years, of rule in the First Republic. So the True Wheat Party success actually began with Anthony W. Gardner when he was elected in 1878.
Wow.
Yes.
So before then, we had a presidential term was 2 years.
It was 2 years.
And later it changed to 4 through a referendum. Let's talk about that referendum and who won that election.
Okay.
Yeah, because we moved from 2 years, I think it was around E.J. Raw or so.
So
it was 2 years, and then
Edward James Raw attempted in 1869 and 1870 to amend the portion of the Constitution that talk about tenure. Tenure was 2 years. But the way Edward James Raw wanted to do it, his colleagues were not in agreement. He wanted to amend the tenure from 2 years to 4 years so that he could succeed himself. And the way he wanted to do it was not for him to be elected after the 4-year term. He wanted to just be his tenure to be automatically extended. In fact, the term he used was quadrennial. He said it should be a quadrennial process, meaning that he should just automatically, succeed himself. And that didn't happen until the referendum of 1907. It was the referendum of 1907 that increased the presidential term, from 2 years to 4 years.
And I know you look at these things. When presidents were serving 2 years, to me, I don't know. You look at this thing. Was it that they were selfless? It was really duty, or it was money making? What was it like? President serving 2 years and going for another election.
I'm not sure it was about wealth. It was about amassing wealth, or it was about some porn pageantry. I think they had a real commitment about organizing a state, about putting in place a structure that will guarantee the governance of the nation. I thought that's what they were doing, and they were doing it consistent with the time. That was the time in which they were operating. So I think something like 2 years just meant that, hey, let's give everyone the opportunity so that they can be able to serve and contribute, their talent, their experience to the building of the nation. I'm very sure it's from that approach that they saw it.
And I think you are right, because that's what I myself, when I read over these things, that's what I gleaned from it, that these people, I mean, it was actual service. Okay, and it will interest you also that someone who was president before will go back and start to work, like Joseph Jenkins Roberts. Some of these people will go and do a regular job in the government, maybe as an ambassador or somebody or something that you wouldn't find today. So it was like, to me, and I want to agree with you that it was out of public service and not the way it looks today.
And that brings me to an important aspect of our democratic history too, our election history too. And you know that very well, Dennis, that has to do with a Charlie Boy, CDB King.
Yeah.
A lot went into our presidential history regarding CDB King. CDB King was elected in 1927, and there was a referendum held alongside his election as well. And the referendum sought to strengthen the qualification of candidates. Like you just asked me the last question, whether it was out of selflessness that they were doing a 2-year term. He also took into account, and the people at the time took into account the need to at least augment the qualification a little bit of people who will stand as candidates. So they had that referendum. And then the referendum also sought to expand the number of the Chief Justice and Associate Justices of the Supreme Court. Chief Justice 1 and then Associate Justices was just 2 at the time. So they expanded the Supreme Court by increasing the number of Associate Justices to 4 during CDB King time. So everything about CDB King was not just negative. I thought to bring this dimension so people can know that CDB King was not just negative. Everything along the line was negative. No. Yes, although CDB King against TJ Faulkner, when he ran against TJ Faulkner, it was totally embarrassing because you had a total register of voters of 15,000, and he came up with a total of 243,000 votes in his favor. That's what he got from the election when you have 15,000 registered voters.
And his opponent got 9,000.
TJ Faulkner got 9,000. TJ Faulkner got 9,000. So if you look at it realistically, I think TJ Faulkner actually won that election. And that election, made its way to the Guinness Book of Records.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did. It did.
And I just want to let you know that a colleague, part of Focus on Liberia, is a great grandson of CDB King, and he's one of those who's challenging that particular record. Historians are digging into that and say not all this was true. It is because at that time, they didn't want to give Liberia its credit because this was a rising democracy, and they wanted to embarrass Liberia before the League of Nations. And besides, also in the business world, these things came out after some issue, and we know how Firestone came in the picture later on. So just to let you know that there are people who are challenging that the story is not accurate, and they are trying.
A lot will have to be done to establish that, because once it made its way to the Guinness Books of Records, to undo it, you have to do a lot to undo it.
Yeah, definitely.
And the story has been deeply rooted in publications, in reading materials globally. So a lot has to be done. A lot has to go into that. I share his anxiety, but also in grief his indulgence, that he needs to do a lot to undo that. So talking about it, if you look at 1927 CDB King, the next thing you want to look at is the long span of rule. 27 years, but I don't know what your question line is, but that would be a significant part of our conversation.
And before we get there, we should also note that at this time, indigenous Liberians were not voting. So the 45,000 or the 9,000 and the 240,000, these were all people of the
American Liberian And we forgot to mention initially along those same lines, American Liberians were divided along the Republican and the True Whig Party lines. You had the darker skin from the True Whig Party, and then you had those who had ancestry traced to African. American Liberian ancestry traced to African and Europeans basically dominated the Republican Party. So it was just important for me to highlight that as well, because that's how they operated along those two lines.
So still in the First Republic, let's come down, because around C.D.B. King going to Berkeley, that's where things started changing significantly.
Yeah.
Were there any referendum or elections in between there that you want to note before Tubman?
They had referendum. They had referendum that we can certainly talk about. In 1946, referendum was the one that gave right to the provinces, people in the provinces.
So I'm talking before Tubman. If we have any other thing in there before because Tubman period is significant. I want us to spend some time on it.
Certainly it is. But those are elections that were just held consistently with the True Whig Party thing, because it was just one party thing now. It was just one party thing alone. There was not much opposition to candidates of the True Whig Party. Many of them went unopposed and they won the election. It was almost like one party system all the way after the natural demise of the Republican Party. So they are just highlights of the period that I would just like us to look at, because we can put the time, we can make significant use of the time talking about those important aspects than the little things that happen in between there.
Yeah, and what I want to bring up is if we are one party state, will we still call that a democracy? And will we call those elections where you either vote yes or no? Was it actually, we talk about the benchmark and those standards for election, will you consider those elections as well?
And that's part of the challenges we've had in our democracy. I think those are the hurdles we had in our democracy, the hindrances that we experience, because you can't have a one-party system and then you refer to it as a functioning democracy. Because a functioning democracy produces competition. There has to be competition of ideas that the citizens will have to buy into. There have to be options for them. Those are the things that constitute, a functional democracy, and it has to be conducted in a free, fair, and transparent manner. I'm told by some of the older folks, because I was not living at that time, Dennis, yourself, older folks that I was born in 1973. I was told by some of the folks that the judge used to say, they say today we're going to vote for Tubman. For Tubman today. They will not say today is election day. Then people are having the right to go and vote and choose the leaders of their choice. No, there were not those options. Like say, today we're going no farm work today, or today we're going to vote for Tubman.
Right. Yeah. And I heard the slogan used to be vote Tubman vote.
To vote Tubman vote, yes.
But
yes.
I know we'll have time for questions, but this is very important because Kanfuma Suarez, since, and it comes to what we were just saying about whether those we will consider that as democracy. So Kanfuma is saying, since 1847, Liberia has been a republic, it is yet to be a democracy. Republic and democracy are two different ideologies. The former is representative system, and the latter is a liberal democracy that comes with issues of human rights and international norm.
Yeah, Kanfuma can go ahead to say that, but even the American Constitution chose a republic over democracy in the American Constitution. But they are the words, strongest democracy right now. So you have to use them interchangeably the way you see it fit. In America, when we talk in democracy, America is not isolated. America is considered a republic, but it's a democracy. They practice a democratic form of government. Liberia is a republic, but we practice that democracy, democratic form of government. And the practice that we choose is representative democracy. That's what we do. So we elect a group of people who make the decisions on our behalf, and then everything goes through them. So that's the kind of democracy we have. That's what I can say.
And Dulake Jonathan say, Tayo say, about Liberia young democracies, say, well, we say that because it was not one-party state. It was not. There was no competition.
Yeah, and that's what you and I just said. Exactly. We said that probably, that's what I said. We said probably because of the quality of our democracy. You mentioned, I talked about the quality dimension of it. I said that, hey, and I defined the elements that a functioning democracy must have. But if you look at our history, there are certain aspects of our democratic history that you find democratic principles amiss, or made at certain level. Like you talk about a one-party system, that's a very long time. And how can you make progress as a democratic nation with a one-party system?
We should also know that before Tubman, I think it was Barclay who had the longest term, because things started getting longer now. Unlike even though they have moved from 2 years to 4 years, but I think it was Barclay who was the first to say 8 years or so. If I'm not mistaken.
They had the referendum conducted to move the presidential term to 8 years. So you could go for 4 years and then go for another 4 years and make it 8 years. But then when Talbot came to power, he changed that to a single 8-year term in another referendum, single 8-year term, and promised that he would leave power in 1983, even though he didn't live to see it.
Let's go to Tubman, the one, according to some Liberians, changed the whole thing. Because unlike Tubman, there was some form of competition before Tubman. When Tubman came in the picture, he squashed that. So let's talk about the Tubman years.
Yeah, he kept going on,
and referendum.
Yeah, he kept going on. He kept going unopposed in so many respects, and he adopted a policy from the French called porte ouverte. And if many people don't know, let me say that today, what we always talk about, the open door policy, was actually a policy called porte ouverte, meaning open door policy. It's a French phrase, meaning open door policy. So that is why, in spite of everything that happened, his one-man rule, his one-party rule for a long time, 27 years, he's also referred to as the father of modern Liberia, simply because he took actions to open up the country for investment in different aspects. And so Tubman is largely responsible for that. And so he is referred to as the father of modern Liberia.
Was there any referendum during Tubman? I think with the counties, I believe.
Yeah, there were referendum conducted at that time. So you had 1943, the presidential candidate, to have lived in Liberia for 25 years. They had a referendum. It was in 1943, along with his election. So it was something that many of the colleagues were not happy about, but they had to do it because it passed. So when it's approved by the people, you don't undo it. So it passed. It was a referendum held alongside with Tubman's election. And in 1945, they also had a referendum that granted right to citizens in the inland part of the country. And they were in 2 provinces. They were in Grand Cape Mount and in Marshall Territory. So that's when people who were paying a hot tax had the opportunity to vote in elections. So those were significant things that happened during Tubman's time. They begin to expand a little bit to get away from the Americo-Liberian center kind of political system, to expand to the indigenous in the rural parts of the country.
And before I forget this, which happened during CDB King turning, impeachment. I mean, I'm looking back and say, well, were things little fairer, more transparent that time? Because to impeach a Liberian president nowadays is almost near impossible.
Absolutely. And you and I were concerned about the 2-year tenure. While the guys did not just allocate to themselves in the Constitution a 10-year tenure or 8-year 8-year tenure, because somebody, by the way, who had time at that time. But I think some of the guys were serious about governance and establishing a legacy for generations to come, even though they had their own differences. So I think it's from that perspective. And if you look at 1870 referendum that I talked about with Edward James Roy, why would you think the legislature overruled his decision? Because Edward James Roy insisted that he counted the votes and that the proposition was approved. And then the legislature came back and said, no, not so fast, Mr. President. The proposition was not approved. We cannot extend the presidential term from 2 years to 4 years. Not at all. We can't do it. It was not approved, and so it was rejected. So imagine what kind of things happening. It's just like talking about it now. You know, the president coming out and saying that the Elections Commission said it was approved, and then the legislature comes out and say, no, it was not approved. It was rejected, and they go into the hullabaloo, and then the legislature gets the upper hand and overrule. You know, that's the kind of thing that happened at that time. So those things were common at that time. But if power was about wealth that individuals were supposed to amass at the time, I'm very sure, and the fame that came along with it, probably, I'm very sure that some of those things won't happen. That the president would be so powerful in a way that he could overrule almost everything and allow things to happen according to his will. But that was not the case. So just about anything was possible at that time.
And I wonder if things would have changed if, for instance, the entire country or the population was involved. If the natives, maybe whether things would have been different. I mean, we would never know.
Again, the whole thing about governance was about one group of people. It was about Americo-Liberians. The descendants of settlers as well. So
it's like this is family thing. So like if everybody came in, maybe things would have been different.
But you see that even the expansion was very gradual. Extending voting rights to them was very gradual. It was in piecemeal. It was not just done at once. And in fact, they had to be sure that because of the death of the Republican Party so many years, and that the right wing, which is the true Whig party, had already amassed power to the extent that it was, recognized all across the country. And so they started now to recognize people who had Republican ideologies, and then to lure them into the true Whig party system of governance. That started to happen. But the process was very gradual. They were meticulous. They were very careful about it.
Right. I'm using these two words interchangeably. Sam Wallace said, not native, then it's indigenous people.
Yeah, I said that. I said that.
Talking to me. So you get the drift, Sam. All right. Yeah. So let's come to President Tolbert. Tubman died. His VP took over and completed the first term. And then there were elections. And people, sometimes we forget that there was election during the Tolbert years. Let's talk about that.
1975. And so what he did was that there was a referendum conducted alongside with the election. And he also went on a pause alongside with the election so that they could have a single 8 years presidential term. You don't have to go 4 years. And then after the 4 years, you are elected again for another 4 years. So the way he encouraged the people to adopt that was for him to make a commitment to the nation that after my 8-year term, which will end in 1983, I will certainly leave power. I won't run again. So he made that commitment, and that election was held. So that made it very historic. That election was held, and then he won. And then the referendum was held alongside with that election, and it was also approved.
Right. So he completed Tubman's term. So from 71 to 75, that's 4 years.
Yes.
He completed that. He needed 8 more. That would be 12 and say, I won't go again, as if he was doing us a favor.
And that was the way. It's like you talking to your kid, telling them that you were bad and more and it's.
If you let me rule for 12 years, I'm not coming back.
Yeah, so 1983. Yeah, but so much when Tubman historically was the only one who shifted away from the True Party policies that ran him into trouble. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And there were reports that President Tubman was grooming his son to succeed him.
Yeah, he was actually doing that. And though that's an interesting part of those story when we come to that A.B. Thomas story with Abidjan. Hopefully we'll talk about that a little bit. But you are quite right that he was grooming his son, and that was the smart part of it when he said that 1983 he was not going to run again. I'm very sure he was going
No, what Taylor used to say, he said, "My word's not Bible."
Not Bible.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Now, 1918, President Tubman is overthrown and killed, and we have the PRC.
Yeah, but before 1980, let's talk about President Tubman shifting away from the True Party policies, especially Tubman policies. Tubman supported the Allies. Tubman supported the Allies against the ISIS power. He did that because of America's interests. Tubman adopted the open door policy, and it worked for Liberia's economy at the time, for which he was hailed and recognized significantly. But when Tubman took over, he shifted away. He did not commit Liberia to one particular diplomatic relations, and in particular the United States of America. Tubman shifted away from the Allies' support to establishing new relations with Communist China, and the Soviet Union. That ran him into trouble, where he started becoming very unpopular at home, and with his own political party. The intra-conflict that he had was as a result of expanding the government and bringing more indigenous people on board in the government. They were not happy about that. His colleagues, the American Liberians, were not happy about that. They used to say to him, "Bawale, this is trouble. You are inviting trouble."
Yeah.
And they didn't want that to happen. So that also ran him into trouble. And then on the foreign front, his policy change also was significant enough to lead to his, the end of his regime.
No alignment. And in fact, there was some school of thought that say this was the coup of 1980 was a palace coup, that his own people, and these are all sometimes it goes into conspiracy.
Someone say conspiracy theories.
Yeah. And there are some that say every time they talk about the 13 that were killed, meaning they were more sympathetic to the 13 government officials than the president. So they don't say 14, they say 13. And that's how some people are reading into it.
And we all carry. And we are
like, okay. I mean, you look for your own trouble. So.
It's like the vehicle. The vehicle is involved in an accident. They say the people die. They say no, only the car. You haven't heard that before?
I heard that.
They say, people die. They say no, nobody died, only the car.
Yeah. And Sia is saying Tubman was inconsistent, and that's something that we can talk about. But let's keep on with elections.
But that's it. He was expanding on the Democratic front to some extent. On the domestic front, he was expanding the government and bringing in indigenous, which was a good thing. But his people also saw it as a non-commitment.
Right.
Yeah, his people saw it
because especially with power coming in, he allowed it, and then later he pulled back, right, and put those guys in jail. And so that's what CIA is saying, that he pushed unequivocally for Sedition Act to silence the protesters. So something that he actually was in favor of, he pulled back, probably under pressure.
Yeah. So a combination of everything led to his end the way it happened.
And there we have Samuel Kayondoro. There's one party he has took over. Constitution is Not changed yet, but it was in the process. That's what people were thinking about. People were expecting him to go back to the barracks around 1983. That's what he promised. It didn't happen. He's still in the election. Talk about that election and even the time leading to the election from INA to elections, and then he won.
The
I like the swearing in.
The PRC, he took over. The People's Retention Council took over. I like to watch videos of Samuel Doe calling the PRC People's Retention Council. I'll still go back to some of those videos. But it was an interesting moment in our history. A flip from the First Republic to the Second Republic, and you have this Master Sergeant. He was actually a corporal from the very beginning, realistically, and when he became president, it was just fair enough to increase his rank, to change his rank, and he was referred to as Master Sergeant Samuel Kai Doe, who led a coup and that overthrew the Talbot government, suspended the constitution, ruled by decrees, and you know that was exchanged. As far as America's interest was concerned, America did not want to be associated with a nation that did not honor democracy. And so Doe actually came under pressure during those years leading to 1985 to return the government to civilian rule. And so there were actions that he began to take, for example, to revise the Constitution, to institute a brand new Constitution as part of his commitment. And so you had an Amos Sawyer Constitution Committee set up. The Amos Sawyer Committee drafted a new constitution with some good provisions. It also included barring military and paramilitary people from taking part in elections, which would have also barred the very Samuel Doe. So when Amos Sawyer came out with that first draft, the way Samuel Doe saw it, and Samuel Doe was also smart, even though he did not get the kind of academic education that you imagine. So what he did was he constituted a council called the Constitution Advisory Council, at the time, and it was headed by Edward Benyon Kezeli. And he sent them to Banga. So many of them, I think about 49 of them, there were many, sent them to Banga and just kept them in Banga. And to have people like Bagbala and the rest of the folks, they will review the draft constitution. And today they say, Mr. President, we need to change this provision. And then they will recommend the change of the provision and then send it to Banga. And then they will change it. And he will say, for example, like the residency clause, Article 52C, which talks about anyone wanting to be president, which in the current constitution has to live in the country for 10 years. But it also fell short of saying whether or not they should live in the country 10 consecutive years. So that Constitutional Advisory Committee is the one that revised the draft that Amos Sawyer team did, and then that went into the referendum of 1984. So it was actually adopted. It was approved by the people, but it did not take effect until January 6, 1986, after the 1985 elections. So Samuel Doe now, after doing that, making sure that there is a path to the renewal of Liberia's democracy, there was an uptick already about that. A conviction, by the U.S. that this guy is to some extent interested in returning the country to civilian rule. But Samuel Doe kept his eyes on the ball so that he could keep himself in power. He missed out on it. And so he started climb down on the Progressive Alliance, on the Movement for Justice in Africa, because they were potential institutions to transform into political parties that would have been obstacle to his goal of keeping himself in power. And so they were now registered to take part in the election. It was only the Liberia Unification Party of former classroom teacher William Gabriel Wole, Liberian Action Party Jason Fiado, the Unity Party of the very Edward Benyon Kezeli, but then which was already seen to be compromised to a large extent, was only in the election for the optic for the picture. And then Samuel Doe on National Democratic Party of Liberia, the NDPL. So those were the parties that actually went into the 1985 election organized by Doe. And at the end, we all know the result. We all know what happened. There were speculations that the Liberia Action Party candidate Justin Fiado won. But Samuel Doe was declared, and some history books refer clearly underscore that he declared himself the winner of the election. But he was declared as the winner of the 1985 election.
Yeah. And we all know what happened after that. There was an invasion.
And he was, let me say this, he was the first president of the Second Republic. Yeah. So that phrase was never left out in any occasion or any event. The first president of the Second Republic.
Yeah.
His Excellency Master Sergeant Samuel Kayando.
That time you were doctor now.
So everything went along, everything went along.
Yeah. The doctorate degree, and it's important to also mention that he became Tanudo.
Yeah.
When President Taylor King became Dakpana. Now, when President Weah came, and that Dakpana title was not given.
But a chief title was given to the vice president.
To the vice president, that was not right. So it didn't go that way. Okay. Now we fast forward, and there was also you mentioned the referendum of
yeah. It took effect in 1986, January 6, 1986. That's the constitution we have currently, 1986 Constitution of Liberia.
And in that constitution, it gave a broad, I want to call it clemency to the coup makers.
Yeah.
To those who made a coup that said, don't hold them, don't touch them.
And those were the things that the advisory council did. The advisory council on the election to reverse the Amos Sawyer draft date.
And since then, we've not been able to change the constitution because every group of people that get there, they feel that this looks good for us to enjoy. Yeah. Let's go to during the war years, there were conferences and everything in between it that went on. Did any of those things made in the constitution or into any of our established laws today?
Those were just agreements that were signed amongst stakeholders. And those agreements have not in any way been incorporated in our constitution. I think they remain as the agreements they were. If you even see the final one that led to the election, the CPA, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, that was adopted in Accra, Ghana. So basically, they all stand as historic documents that talk about how we transition from the crisis to democracy.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, this is Focus on Liberia. We are discussing the history of presidential elections and referendums in Liberia. My guest is Mr. Josiah F. Joekai. He's an election practitioner and bridge certificated facilitator. Mr. Joekai, let's go now to and the only one I want to mention that almost made it was the TRC, which came out of the call. So at the TRC recommendation being part of the Constitution now, will maybe have something from those agreements getting into our Constitution, but they didn't. So let's go into...
There could actually be a competition. Different institutions, different individuals will have called for the inclusion of other documents, important documents that reference all of the things that we did,
So let's go into 1997 election.
Yeah.
Taylor won that election. And
1997 election, interestingly, I was schooling in Guinea by then through a scholarship from the UN. I studied French at CERF called Centre d'études de la langue française at the university in Conakry. And yes. So I'm bilingual though. So
d'accord.
Yeah. Oui, absolument, je parle français.
D'accord.
On peut causer après le programme. Oui.
D'accord. Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Yeah, so I follow everything in Liberia, but then Charles Taylor, many of the folks around the world didn't want him to be elected president in 1997 when we had a special election as a way of resolving the issue. But I, in particular, did not see Charles Taylor as being the issue during that election. I think the long list of candidates who participated in the election should also be blamed to a large extent, because I think it was a moment for sober reflection. It was a solemn moment in our history for them to have come together and reflect on everything that we have gone through as a nation. The number of Liberians, the fellow compatriots that lost their lives, the magnitude of properties destroyed during the crisis, to come and be very selfless and just choose one person, not on the basis of how much they get or what theme is associated with it. Just pick one person and every one of them rally to support Taylor. Even if they were going to be defeated by Taylor, there will be a history for our children to see, to know that, our politicians stood up for the country and not their individual selves.
And let us also mention that Dr. Joseph and Baba appeared on the show a few days ago and talked about how the Constitution was violated, that President Doe was killed, and so the person to take over from him was his vice president according to the Constitution, and that didn't happen. And Dr. Sawyer, who was one of the architects, political science instructor or professor at the university, and who was like very good in these things, participated in organizing an interim government, which, according to Dr. Baba, was a violation of the Constitution. Your comment?
Doe was not killed just as Samuel Doe. Doe was killed as the president. So it was about toppling the regime of Samuel Doe. It was an overthrow. So you can't be overthrown. Only that the people who killed Doe did not have the opportunity to take power, to stay in power, even though they were calling for their cassette. They wanted their cassette to be played, their recording to be played. To be played. The people who killed Doe actually could not take power. But it was
so the people that couldn't they use Harry Moneyba as the interim president? Or maybe the coup makers or the killers wouldn't accept.
It was a crucial period. It was not like the 1980 coup where the coup makers had control, where they took over and had control. That was not the situation with Doe. You already had a peacekeeping force in the country with a mandate. You already had warring factions who were parties to the conflict. And you had to kill. It was a fluid situation, in my opinion, fluid situation. So on different circumstances, yes, that would be possible, but not in the situation that we had. We had a fluid situation, and besides that, the military wing of ECOWAS at the time, ECOMOG, had a special mandate.
Right, and perhaps they were kind of acquiesced in the killing of Doe, and so they had their own plan.
If you think about General Kwanu's role in the whole thing, and everything, you don't want to speculate. Again, you don't want to come up with a conspiracy theory, but it's highly possible for the people to believe that it was orchestrated.
Let's go to any referendum during 1997 elections and after that.
1997, we did not have a referendum.
Things were so that kind of way for any referendum.
There was no referendum in Liberia. I think the only thing that happened is 2011. We had referendum in Liberia, 2011. I was part of it. I was part of the organization and conduct of that referendum. In fact, of the National Referendum Committee set up by the Elections Commission. I was the secretary. I documented everything regarding that referendum. We had a referendum alongside with the general elections in 2011. And the referendum sought to amend certain provisions of the Constitution, like the election date. And the change was not going to be significant. because it was seeking to change the election date from second Tuesday in October to the second Tuesday in November. It doesn't make any significant difference. So you are thinking about the absolute majority system being changed to simple majority for all non-presidential elections. That is the only one that succeeded, and that was the success in that election because the other three propositions were defeated. So you had 1.7 million registered voters that voted in the election and were supposed to vote in the referendum, but you only had 615,000 of the registered voters, less than half of the total number of voters voting in a referendum, because before the polls could be conducted, people already started developing the notion that the referendum was about they versus us, that people were about, now the elite was about to make changes to the constitution in their own favor again. And I'm telling you this because I was involved with the dissemination of the information, taking the referendum and the election to the public. We had consultations across the country. We had difficult time convincing the citizens about the importance of the referendum, the amendment to the Constitution. That was a difficult situation. And going into the referendum, at the end of the day, we knew that it was not going to succeed. And the only way that the absolute majority system was the simple majority system was approved was because one of the political parties, after the counting of the referendum votes, filed a petition against the National Elections Commission for including the invalid votes in the to the valid votes in the tabulation and counting of the referendum votes. And so the court acted that it should be set aside, and in fact it should be deleted, the Supreme Court, and that was the only way that the simple majority passed. It was approved. So today it means that simple majority for legislative elections, when we are to have local elections, is going to be simple majority and everything. But the presidential vote is definitely going to be absolute majority, 50% plus one. You must get it on the first vote. Otherwise, there has to be a runoff between the two highest candidates with the highest votes in the first round. So that's the referendum we had in 2011.
And we're almost out of time. I want us to take some viewers' comments before we close. I know 2017 election, there was a currently we just had a referendum. It's still fresh, but let's do viewers justice here and bring them in the discussion before we close. Sam Wallow, can you talk about how Tubman was able to break the nation's institution so people understand how he did it? That's important. And Sam, we're going to have a complete series on these presidents and what they did, their vision and what they did. Dr. George Clay Kia is going to handle all this. So come next week, we're going to start with the whole concept of the hegemonic presidency or the King Kong presidency. That we have this dominant presidency, which really started with Tubman. So we're going to take care of that next week. Please come. Jackie Sayer, Tubman's moral stand has Liberia to be non-aligned country was not well received by the Western powers.
Yeah, I said that.
Yeah.
I said that.
So concerning about expanding
relations with Communist China, with the Soviet Union, and it was not in America's interest.
Yeah. Tubman needed numbers. In fact, the government of Liberia encouraged the first Poro conference. So, and I read this too, that Tubman was not popular with the True Wave Party. So he needed numbers. So he extended to he wanted to create his own base.
Yeah, and
did that successfully.
Started to expand, like I said, the scope of the True Wave Party to involve the indigenous when he started giving voting rights to them through referendum. So even his colleagues saw it to be something dangerous. Yeah.
CSA PRC was in chaos, state was in chaos, and thus Liberia recycled the same persons the military intended to remove. Charlatan Week is doing the same. Kafumba marginalization of indigenous people explain why Liberia was declared a republic instead of a democratic republic of Liberia. No human rights, no rule of law. Let's figure out the legal implication of the two concepts, republic and democracy. Kafuma is back with that same concept. So
yeah, republic, a republic practicing democracy.
people not educated or didn't know about politics or a lying or truth-telling politician were allowed to vote for fear of bribery. Many indigenous educated Liberians voted. Look what's happening now. Politicians are bribing uneducated indigenous with a few cups of rice and $10 for vote. You're talking about 100 years ago, like yesterday. You got his point?
I got that point. Politicians have not changed. That's what he's saying. They have not changed, so.
Yeah, and he's continuing to say pretty soon it might even get worse. People will be voting for anyone because of hungry stomach. Let's get more comments here. This one from UJ Dekie. Great job, comrade. Are you willing to provide expertise to the National Election Commission in Liberia if you are asked to do so? If you went there, what could you do differently? I want you to answer that quickly, Mr. Joekai.
There was a time I had an opportunity to compete with 4 colleagues from the Elections Commission through the Civil Service Agency for the position of Executive Director. Now, let me tell you why. Executive Director at the time provided by the Constitution was appointed by the President, nominated by the in fact, directly appointed by the President. And so when the President, in my opinion, had interest, required the then chair, Jerome Kokoya, to recommend 4 persons to the Civil Service Agency to go through a professional hiring process. And when I went in for my interview, many people were of the opinion that, I was qualified for the job. Even some of the top people that they interview about the 4 of us, they said Joekai would be good for the job. And then when I went in the room, guess who I saw sitting in the room in the back? I saw USAID representative. I saw UNDP representative. I saw all of them sitting in the back taking note during my interview. And the Civil Service Agency, the how you call the women law group in Liberia, the Association of Female Lawyers. Yes, yeah. The representative was there on the interview board, the CSA on the interview board, the Liberian Bar Association on the interview board. And one of the questions they asked me what I would do, and I said to them that the Liberian government has to fund its own election to cap the independence of our electoral commission, which is significant. Do anything possible to fund our election. I said, if funds are not provided on time and appropriately, I will man up told the executive that the elections will not be conducted if the required funds are not provided. Because election is a delicate process. If you are supposed to conduct an activity at a given point in time and you don't conduct it because you don't have the resources, you miss it. It runs straight into the next activity. So I told them what I will do for donor support to the commission. I will ensure that donor support is coordinated. Donor agencies don't go straight to commissioners. I will ensure that the secretariat work out the details on donor support. The election commission dictates to the donor what we need the funds for, and we work with the donor to ensure that the job is done, not as it is being done now. That where donors can walk in and say, okay, this is what we support. And because their support basically is on the results area. They want to go to the results area. They want to make sure that they are involved. They want to hire people that they have interest in to sit in our data center with our data management people to do that. So those are things that definitely that needs to be changed.
They didn't like that.
No, they didn't like it. So they didn't get me to get the executive director position.
Cynicism is disappointed idealism. That's Dr. Dekie. Have referendum helped Liberians improve in their electoral process? What would you suggest about electoral education in Liberian schools?
It is very important. That's why I've always emphasized on enforcing Article 10 of the 1986 Constitution, which talk about publishing the Constitution, disseminating it, and teaching its principles in institutions of learning across the country. It did not say some institution or institutions of learning across the country. This is something we need to go back to. And because of that, we have always called for the establishment of what you call a National Civic Education Commission. It should be independent. It should be able to work 24/7 to educate Liberians on their constitution, but that they are informed about their roles, their rights, and responsibilities. And some of those will include their role in holding referendums, its significance, and why is it important to improving governance in the country, and their role in voting people into offices and removing them from offices when they don't deliver upon their mandate consistent with their hopes and aspirations. So yes, I do support that strongly, and I have always proposed the way we should go about this.
Thank you, Mr. Joekai. It's Super Bowl Sunday, so I will let you go now. But I wouldn't do that until you give us your concluding statement. I know we've talked a lot. You didn't actually go into 2017 and after. You can use that opportunity to wrap up. And if anything you left out you want to mention, that you can do that as well.
Yeah, my brother who was talking about recycle politicians, 2017 was also one of my disappointment as a Liberian citizen. But disappointed now that I hate George Weah. I'm one person who hated George Weah, who talked positive things about him prior to 2017. I'm one person who was beaten by Momo Jiba because of George Weah, James Diva, and other people at SKD when I was leading Patriots, cheering squads in Mercedes buses to SKD to cheer the team. I'm one person that took off my shirt, ran in the street and celebrated when George Weah led our team and we won. And I'm one person who believed that that is his area and that he will have done 1 million things to improve the lives of people in the country compared to his role in politics at the time. I said that. And the CDC came to power just on George Weah's popularity because there was no policy produced at the time convincingly to any reasonable person to justify the election of George Weah as the best option, you know, in the moment in our history. But mind you, there were also many young people in the country downtrodden who believed that George Weah was their hope and it was their moment, it was the time. So they believe in him and nothing could change their mind. But there was no policy to show how a CDC government would have governed differently from a unity party government. So it was by changing people. The election of George Weah was just by changing Ellen Johnson's her team and replacing them with George Weah and his team. So that's why when the election came and they won, it was like, oops, we got it. What do we do now? They started scrambling to put plans together. They started scrambling to make sure that they get on the right track for governance in the country. So George Weah was elected out of mixed reaction, and his election resulted to mixed reaction. Many people jubilated that he was the hope without any evidence. And there were other pundits who did not believe that George Weah would have, produced a very good government that would have changed some of the economic issues that we have in the country, the governance issues that we have in the country, because he had no clue, his background completely unrelated to the presidency. I remain unbending and unapologetic in, making those comments. I've made them. I have them in my book, The Danger of Celebrating Power, the case of Liberia, that discusses we as government and Donald Trump, the former president of the United States. And so I want to say to Liberians that, hey, we have a history of presidential elections in our country. We have a history of referenda in our country that reflect that we have one of the oldest democracies, to all the United States. This year is going to make us 174 years old, experiencing a democratic form of government. We are to do more to improve so that it's reflective of our long history of electioneering. I want to say thank you, Dennis. These are the kinds of conversations I like for us to have. I very much appreciate it to the entire Focus on Liberia team. I look forward to having more of such conversation, something that I can talk about, So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Joekai, for the time. We want to also thank our viewers for staying here with us, leaving some important issues and the schedule, such as Super Bowl Sunday. People love the pre-game show when they stay here with us, because we know that the issue of Liberia, making right where we have some missteps, is very important. And every time we have the opportunity to talk about it, we will definitely do so. In fact, coming soon to Focus on Liberia, we'll have a whole series on the building of a new nation. We're going to start from the foundation and see what we need. The Liberia we all envisage, that we all dream of. How can we craft that particular nation? And we want to invite.
Whenever you have, the need for us to talk about the elections dimension of it, the things that we need to do to improve our democracy, improve election management, don't hesitate. Let me know. I can always share.
Yeah, definitely. Because this series is going to go into even architecture, the layout of our cities. We're going to start from the foundation. We're going to bring in linguistics, anthropologists, to talk about these things. How can we build a new Liberia? First, we'll look at what is there, what we think is wrong with it, and how it can be fixed. And you can't get that anywhere else besides focus on Liberia.
I don't want to leave Dicky's question unanswered. He asked whether or not when I'm invited to contribute at the Elections Commission, I will accept. Dicky, wholeheartedly, I will accept. That doesn't mean I don't have anything doing here. I have a lot of things doing here. But for the sake of Liberia, I will accept, definitely.
Definitely. And that's what anytime we bring people, that's our goal. We want to help. Anyone can look at it as people looking for a job. Right now, if anybody give me 10 cents over what I'm making, I've changed job in America before. So there's nothing wrong with changing job and going to work in your own country. There's nothing more satisfying than me working, as the superintendent of Sino County. I'm able to go to Dodo and sleep and come back and come to work. I don't think there's anything that is more satisfying than that. If I can drink from Nemani River and go back to work, nothing beats it. On that note, we want to say thank you so much for joining us tonight. Normally, we never close our broadcast without playing our theme song, our closing song that says, "We are all Liberians." Our history is rich. The history is there. We just need to go back to it, look at it, and make corrections or make some changes to because everything we've seen here, there's nothing new. And the more we refer to history, the more we learn from it, the better we can. On that note, we say good night and God bless you.
We are Liberians.